Story 1. Mine are identical, and we kept their hospital bracelets on them for 1 to 2 weeks after they were born because we didn't have a different system worked out for identifying them. Fortunately, one of them developed a big mole on his thigh, and the other one didn't, so we were able to remove the bracelets and stop stressing about it. We call it the fail-safe. The pediatrician looked at it and said it's fine. They are 3.5 years old now, and we have definitely mixed them up mildly here and there in the last few years, but the mole is always the indicator if we really can't figure it out. Even that hasn't happened in about 2 years. These days, they have pretty different personalities, but most importantly, they have very different haircuts. Oh, and they have always had different clothes. We assigned one green and dinosaurs and the other blue and sharks. Story 2. My aunt had twins. When they came home, she kept their bracelets on to tell them apart. One day, Baby K got a small cut on one of her fingers. My aunt decided it was safe to cut the bracelets off because she could tell Baby K and Baby B apart. She cut off the bracelets and tucked them in for their nap in the crib. When they woke up later, both babies had identical cuts on the same finger. She has no idea where it came from and cannot say for certain that she didn't mix the girls up after that. Story 3. Here is a story about a cousin of mine who had twins. When she found out she was having twins, she began to come up with ideas for how to tell them apart after they were born. She developed several different ways to keep track of them. When she told the midwife about her ideas and asked for her opinion, the midwife stared at her blankly for a moment and reminded her that she was having a boy and a girl, making it easy to figure out who was who. Critical thinking is not a strong point for that cousin. Story 4. My parents wrote our names on the bottom of our shoes, so we joke that it's possible they mixed us up at some point. Story 5. We kept the hospital bracelets on our identical twins for about a week. After that, we were so sleep-deprived due to colic that we stopped worrying about it. Honestly, I figured that if we mixed up their names once, we would do it more than once, which means we had a 50% chance of them coming out of the potato stage with their original names. I'm reasonably sure we got it right, but now that they can tell me their own names, those names suit them. If that makes sense. Story 6. My friend's twin sisters had tattoos that the hospital applied behind each ear. The firstborn had a dot in her right ear, and the second had a dot in her left ear. They used a needle and ink to create very small dots. At the hospital in Brazil, they also need to identify each sister to track weight, height, medications, and various other details. Story 7. All the time, my identical boys looked different at birth. One was bigger than the other, making it easy to tell them apart at the start. Now that they are 1 year old, it's harder. I never dressed them the same, as it confuses me even more. Luckily, they have birthmarks on different body parts. Story 8. We are fortunate with our daughters. They look exactly alike, but one is noticeably larger and has been since their birth. Story 9. My cousins are identical, but one of them had ongoing lung issues and needed steroids because they were premature. They did get mixed up once, which was quite serious. The cousin who required the steroids did not receive them for almost a week after a confusing bath time, and ended up back in the hospital after experiencing a severe wheezing episode. My aunt had a bit of a breakdown and pierced one of their ears after that, which I dislike but understand the reason for such a drastic action. They are both in their 20s now and doing well. Story 10. Mine are identical. In the hospital, they gave me a surgical skin marker at my request, and I used it to write the first initial of one twin on the bottom of his big toe. After a couple of weeks, I noticed a difference in the hair swirls on the back of their heads, but I continued to use the initial on the toe for a while for everyone else's sake. Around 3 to 4 years old, they developed different freckle patterns that made it more obvious to others. It is one of those situations where, if they had been mixed up as tiny babies, it would be fairly irrelevant at this point, especially since they have the same DNA. However, we kept close track of it because I was worried about it back then. Story 11. My identical twin boys had a significant level of growth discordance in utero. Twin B was receiving the majority of the nutrients. When they were born at 35 weeks, twin A weighed 5.5 pounds, and twin B weighed 7 pounds, 11 ounces. Needless to say, they have been easy to distinguish since birth. To this day, twin B has a slightly larger head than his brother. Interestingly, extended family members and teachers still confuse them. It surprises me because our immediate family can always tell them apart. They are very different in personality. Story 12. I have two sets of twin girls. The older girls are identical, and the younger ones are fraternal. I have always been able to tell my identical twins apart by sight. The older twin had slightly chubbier cheeks as a newborn, and as she got older, she developed a small cowlick at the front of her hairline. There are many subtle differences in identical twins that help identify each one. Before color identification, I occasionally mix them up by voice, though. My fraternal girls have always been easy to distinguish. They are both blue-eyed blondes but have very different facial features and body types. Story 13. As someone who is pregnant with twin girls, I am very curious about this as well. I hope they both have a distinctive feature to tell them apart. Thank you to all the parents of twins who responded and offered their well wishes and advice. You are all amazing. Story 14. I find that identical twins are not completely identical. There are subtle differences. I can almost always tell my boys apart. My fiancé has mixed them up a couple of times when he wasn't looking closely, but you would never permanently mix them up. In my case, their heads are shaped a bit differently. One has chubbier cheeks and they have different smiles. Story 15. The first thing I packed in my hospital bag is quick-dry nail polish in pink and lilac, a color for each girl. Hopefully, that will help us keep them straight until we can tell the difference between them. Story 16. I have identical twin boys. They had a 1-pound weight difference, so it was easy not to confuse them at first. After my younger son caught up to his brother's growth, other differences appeared, such as personality and facial expressions. Even now, I can look back at pictures and know who is who based on their smiles alone. Story 17. Our second baby was fraternal twins, a boy and a girl. For the first few days, their older sibling would announce, "The blue one is crying. The pink one wants you." It was so adorable. Story 18. As a parent of identical twins, it can be easy to differentiate them from the start. Identical twins are not truly identical in every aspect. There is usually some distinguishing feature that you, as a parent, will recognize. It's interesting because I believe my twins look quite different from each other. Yet we have friends who struggle to tell them apart. I suppose it's all about perception. Story 19. I am an identical twin. My parents used colored hair ties as bracelets to tell my brother and me apart. This was blue and mine was green. Ever since then, green has always been my color. I don't know if you can bond with a color, but I'm pretty sure I have. We sometimes joke that our older brother switched the bracelets to get back at our mom for something silly, as he is a few years older. Story 20. At this point, I use both names and address them both. One is for the issue, and the other is for something random. Story 21. Mine are fraternal twins, but they are so alike that most people thought they were identical. I cannot honestly put my hand on my heart and swear that twin one is actually twin one. I'm pretty sure, but in those first weeks, with almost no distinguishing features or personality, I can't be completely certain. My ex-husband would say differently, but this is the moment I realized that I truly do have face blindness, not just a bad memory. Story 22. When they were very young, I couldn't tell them apart. One of the twins has a distinctive birthmark on her forearm. My sister-in-law held one of them and asked me who the baby was. I grinned and approached them both. While unwrapping the blanket, I asked, "Who are you?" The room filled with laughter, and to this day, it remains a funny memory for me. Story 23. Mine are identical, but one has had a hemangioma since birth, so I can just look under his shirt if I ever lose track. I can see the difference in their faces now, though, so it doesn't happen as often. Story 24. I used bracelets for a while and have separate sets of clothes for them, as I'd like them to have their own identities. Once they got teeth, one had either two teeth that fused together or one tooth with two crowns, so I am very confident I never mixed them up. They also have very different personalities, and I can hear the differences in their voices. Story 25. My mom definitely mixed up my sister and me when we were babies. She also used the nail polish trick that someone else mentioned, but it was children's nail polish that peeled off easily. When that happened, she just guessed. Eventually, my sister developed a mole that I didn't have, and that helped, but until then, we looked exactly the same. Story 26. I am a triplet, and sometimes my parents will go through all the names until they get to the right one. Story 27. We used to put nail polish on one of them when they were babies. We never dressed them the same, but my wife always put one of them in something pink, so when we look back at pictures, we know who is who. They are 6 now, and one of them got adventurous and jumped off a table, breaking her arm. We shouldn't have any issues telling them apart for 6 weeks. Story 28. My parents often confuse my sisters, even though they don't look alike, and there is an 11-year age difference between them. It happens with twins. Story 29. Identical twins take footprints right away, and my wife also put a sharp edge on one of their little toes. It wasn't long before you could easily tell them apart after living with them continuously. They are almost 13 years old, and strangers find it challenging, but people who know them find it impossible, which seems strange to me since their personalities are quite different. Story 30. I saw my twins open their eyes for the first time. From that point on, it was easy to tell them apart by their eyes alone. They are identical, but to my wife and me, they look like completely separate individuals. Story 31. I have identical daughters. We kept their hospital bracelets on for 2 weeks and then painted their big toenails different colors until we discovered a faint birthmark on one. I definitely mixed them up a few times, and I still do now that they're toddlers, but I can always sort it out by checking the birthmark. Story 32. Our children are fraternal twins, but they looked very similar when they were born. Both had birthmarks on their faces that were different, which made it easy to tell them apart until they got older. You can still see remnants of those marks today. They are just much lighter. Story 33. My twins are fraternal and 16-year-old boys. When they were newborns, it was hard to tell them apart. The other night, I mentioned that maybe during those first exhausting weeks, I might have swapped them. One of them said, "Thanks for unlocking a new neurosis, Mom." Story 34. My sister has twins. I jokingly suggested that we could mix them up while she was pregnant, so we decided the first one to be born would be called Yellow and the second one Pink. Thankfully, we did that, as they were so identical that none of us knew who was who. Now they are nearly 7 years old, and one has 2 freckles on her face. From behind, I cannot tell them apart, although one has a deeper voice. Story 35. Mine are not identical, but when I went to the hospital in labor, I took a bottle of black nail polish with me, just in case. Story 36. Twin B here. My parents obtained a copy of the hospital baby footprint so that if my sister and I were switched, they could cross-verify with the footprints. Granted, we are fraternal twins, so I don't think it was even really necessary, but I always thought it was a good idea to have that fallback. Story 37. I have identical twin girls, but one was born with a 6th toe. When they were babies, I would catch my husband taking off their socks to see which baby was which. People would ask how we tell them apart, and he would take off one daughter's sock and say, "Here's how." I was always able to tell them apart, though. I think it's a mom thing. Story 38. Not a parent, but a twin. Growing up, Mom could never tell Rachel and me apart. It didn't matter if she bought us different clothes or gave us different haircuts. We would switch places just to mess with her. Then I came out and started transitioning. Now Mom can tell us apart quite easily, as I usually have a beard. Story 39. I had identical twins who were born with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. So baby A was born over a pound bigger than baby B. In the months following the birth, baby A remained slightly bigger, which helped me tell them apart. Then baby B started gaining weight and became so close to baby A in weight that I would occasionally mix them up. By that time, they had already developed distinct personalities. They smiled differently, for example, so I do not believe they were ever switched. I also trust my ability to always identify them. From behind, I might need a moment, but I do much better than my husband, who still finds it challenging to tell them apart. They are almost 11. Additionally, one is right-handed and the other is left-handed, which helps. Story 40. Coming from someone expecting twin boys in 5 weeks, this has been very helpful. Thank you all. Story 41. In Full House, Jesse mixed them up, but it was okay because they had the footprints from birth. He matched the babies to each footprint. Story 42. Mine are fraternal, not identical. They have different eye colors, hair colors and textures, and even different skin tones. Story 43. My youngest brothers are identical twins. While in the hospital, my parents relied on bracelets, and when they came home, they painted the big toenail of the oldest twin. As they grew, we noticed that the one with 2 L's in his name also had 2 cowlicks and 2 moles under his nose. The one with 1 L in his name had 1 cowlick and 1 mole. This made it much easier to explain to teachers, friends, and babysitters how to remember who was who. Story 44. Mine are fraternal brothers, meaning they are normal siblings born 13 minutes apart. I enjoy when people ask me if they are identical and if I can tell them apart. They are not identical and they look very different to me. They have distinct bone structures and features. Twin A resembles my husband, while Twin B resembles me, but they share the same hair color, complexion, and are almost the exact same size and proportions. However, I frequently call them by the wrong names. Their names are quite different, but my brain doesn't cooperate. I also often call them by the dog's name. Story 45. One of them has a unique birthmark, which made it easy to identify them. Now they are teenagers and easy to tell apart, except when we only hear their voices, they are identical. Story 46. My daughters are identical but looked different enough that we never got them mixed up. One was bigger and longer and they developed different facial features. Now they look very similar if I cannot see their faces, so I often say, "Hey, whoever you are, come over here," which is fun. Story 47. We painted a few toenails different colors for each of our identical twin boys during the first few months. Fortunately, their faces are identical but mirror images of each other. One pouts to the left and the other to the right, making it easy to differentiate them upon closer inspection. Now that they are almost 4, there is no chance we would ever mix them up due to their distinct personalities and voices. However, from a distance, if we dress them alike, we mix them up frequently. Story 48. There was an episode of This American Life featuring the Sklar brothers. Their mother was concerned that she had mixed them up. Story 49. My mom mixed me and my twin up only once when we were small babies, and she was very upset with herself about it. She says she always knew who was who, but that one time she slipped up. In baby photos, I can't tell us apart, but she always can. She said it's the tiny details that made it possible at first, like freckle placement and eyebrow shape. Now that we're adults, we are definitely easier to tell apart. Story 50. When my identical twins were a few months old, I remember being utterly confused about who was who one day. I was very tired, but I figured it out soon after. Story 51. I am the mother of identical girls. When they were born, one had more hair than the other and one was 10 ounces larger, making it easy to tell them apart. Now that they are older, they go through phases of looking very similar and different. I cannot tell them apart from behind. I need to see their faces or hear their voices. They also enjoy dressing alike, so not all twins are compelled to do so. However, they are 8 years old now, and I'm sure things will change as they grow. Story 52. I am a mother of identical twins. I kept their hospital bracelets on for a couple of weeks. One baby had a prominent birthmark on the back of her neck, which helped me tell them apart. However, I still had a few moments during the night when I was sleep-deprived and mistakenly picked up the wrong baby. Story 53. My brother and his girlfriend identified them by the veins on the side of their heads in the beginning. I still wonder if they have been swapped at some point. Almost 10 years later, I still wait until one says the name of the other to figure out who is who, and then I create a mnemonic like Bob is the one in the blue sweater to remember for the rest of the day. Despite all the trouble they cause, I am baffled that they still haven't pretended to be each other in my presence. They seem to take that detail very seriously. Story 54. One of my friends has twins, 2 girls who are now 20 years old. He once confided in me that he is pretty sure that when they were babies, they were switched many times. Story 55. I grew up with a pair of twins as friends. I would always ask one of them his name and he'd tell me. Then I'd ask, "How do you know?" I'd also pretend to mix up their identities, tell them they were my favorite, and ask them not to tell the other. I miss those guys. Story 56. I knew a family that got them mixed up. You could tell by their personalities that they had been mixed up. Aureliano Segundo was clearly an Arcadio, and Jose Arcadio Segundo was clearly an Aureliano. But no one ever said it out loud. Story 57. My kids counted the gifts under the tree. Heaven forbid there wasn't an even amount. Including game systems and expensive hoodies, they drove us crazy. Story 58. When I was pregnant with my twins, my husband was so worried that he would not be able to tell them apart after they were born. I ordered personalized anklets for both of them, but it was clear after they were born that we would be able to tell them apart. I even knew which one was which inside the womb. They turned 3 today. Story 59. 2 of my sisters are identical twins. My mom could tell them apart, but my dad definitely struggled, especially when only one of them was in trouble. It didn't help that they always dressed the same either. God damn it. Honey, which one is this one? It was hilarious. They would go to each other's classes and other activities at school too. No one but my mom could tell them apart. Story 60. Mine are identical. I mix them up often, but I know I never switched them because one has a heart defect and a murmur. A doctor would have said something. Additionally, they act very differently. Story 61. Mine are fraternal, but I have never forgotten which is which. We did put each one in a specific hat for the first week or so until we were absolutely certain. We have never really dressed them alike, which helps. Story 62. When they were first born in the neonatal intensive care unit, I look back at pictures and see that they looked exactly alike. I have to look at the background to figure out which twin it is. As time passed, they developed hemangiomas, and now I can tell them apart by looking at that. Story 63. Mine are very fraternal, so no, but it hasn't stopped people from asking if they are twins or if I mix them up. They are both girls, but one has hair while the other is still bald. One weighs 3 pounds more and is in a size up from the other. Their personalities are completely different as well. My husband cannot tell their newborn photos apart, even though I can. However, to be fair, they are squishy newborns, so there aren't many distinguishing features. Story 64. Not a parent, but I am a twin. I was born underweight, so I had to stay in the hospital for a while before I could go home. When my mother brought my sister home, she would sometimes get confused at first. Wait, I brought a boy. Story 65. My cousin had identical twin girls, and in the first month, one of them always had a ribbon tied around her ankle to differentiate them. However, the grandmother could never remember which twin wore the ribbon, so she kept asking, "Who's the one with the ribbon again?" Of course, the parents always knew. It was quite amusing. Story 66. I had identical twins in December, and from the moment they were born, we have been able to tell them apart because of their head shapes. Twin 1 was deep in my pelvis for 3 months, so her head is misshapen. She also has slightly darker hair. Our relatives are now starting to struggle with identifying who is who, as they are beginning to look similar since Twin 1's head is evening out more. Twin 1 also has a mole on her back, so for now we are safe. I don't foresee us mixing them up for a long time, if ever. Story 67. I have grown identical boys, and I was surprised to learn that some parents have difficulty telling their children apart. To me, mine looked completely different from the start. There was no way I could mix them up. Yet, everyone else around them had no clue which one was which. I thought it was a neat trick parents developed when they have identical twins, but apparently that's not the case. Story 68. I went to school with twins, and they said that their parents used to write their names in washable marker on the bottoms of their feet. Story 69. Well, Twin B had hydrocephalus, so the larger head has always made it easy to tell them apart. Also, Twin B is still in the neonatal intensive care unit at almost 7 weeks old. They just placed a shunt recently, and I'm hoping he gets to come home soon. Story 70. Luckily, all my twin nieces are fraternal. Still, it can be hard to tell who is just being a kid and who is being a jerk. Story 71. Mine are identical, but I don't think they look alike at all. Sure, they have the same hair, eyes, height, weight, and face. The orthodontist even said, even their tooth emergence patterns are the same, but I don't believe they look the same either now or when they were babies. Story 72. Mine are identical. My now ex-wife and I made a point to dress each twin differently for us and everyone else. Now, 2 weeks past their 18th birthday, I have no problem telling them apart. They are two different girls and even look different to me and their mom. To everyone else, though, there isn't much difference. Story 73. My friend has two sets of identical twins. She said she mixed them up many times, and she is not sure they have the original names, nor does she care. Now that they are older, their personalities differ more, making it easier to tell them apart, but they can still pretend to fool those who do not know them. Story 74. I use a permanent marker. I learned it from Michael. It works very well. I just need to reapply it every couple of days. Story 75. I joked about being able to tell them apart easily every time with 50% accuracy, but that was just a joke. Fun fact: identical twins aren't always visually identical. Mine were actually easy to tell apart, to the point that I doubted they were truly identical twins, and I paid $450 for genetic testing to settle the question, which was resolved with over 99% accuracy. Apart from a few photos from when they were infants with no hair, most people can tell them apart pretty easily. Story 76. My girls are fraternal, so it is easy to tell them apart. However, sometimes I look at old pictures and wonder which one is which. We chose two names and waited until their birth to decide who would get which name. When it was born, I knew exactly which name was for her, and I cannot imagine them having switched names. Story 77. Not identical, but at least to me, I think all babies look the same. My mom painted one of our pinky toenails pink, and my twins was red. Or maybe it was the opposite. I don't remember. She did this to make sure we did not get mixed up. Story 78. I am a foster parent, and I once cared for a pair of infant twin boys for the weekend. It turns out that their mother had found an effective way to differentiate between them. One of the boys was circumcised, and the other was not. It was surprising to realize this when I first went to change their diapers. However, it is a reliable method to tell them apart, and it is performed in the hospital, so there are not many chances to mix them up before it is done. Story 79. There are some wild stories here, but I really thought there was something called Skin Scribe. It is baby safe and not permanent like a temporary tattoo. Story 80. There was an episode of the podcast This American Life about this. The mother used colored safety pins to tell the children apart, and the pediatrician removed them. The mother could never be sure after that which child was which, but they investigated and solved the mystery. Story 81. I read a similar post where the parents painted one of their toenails. I thought that was very cute. What a dilemma. Story 82. Nail polish. The brand we used was Piggy Paint. One boy had red, the other blue. We did this until they were about 9 months old, when we figured out one was left-handed and one was right-handed. Looking back at pictures, I can instantly tell who is who just by their faces, but at the time, being so sleep-deprived, I couldn't tell them apart at all. I still dress them differently so you can tell them apart quickly from a distance, in case I need to shout someone's name. I got that idea from a Babysitter's Club book I read as a kid. The funny thing is I have two older girls 4 years apart, and I dressed them in identical clothes for the longest time because they wanted to match. I think my twins have only worn identical clothing about 4 times. Story 83. I have a pair of identical twin cousins in the family, and their mom and dad put their initials behind one of their ears or on the back of their heads with a Sharpie because they looked like copies of one another. As they got older, they showed personality differences that helped, and they didn't need to do that anymore. Story 84. Our twins had differently shaped heads. Baby A's head was pressed against my wife's pelvis, while Baby B had a blockier head. Baby A also had a hole in her heart, which did not heal, so at 4 months, she underwent open heart surgery to have a patch put on the hole and to fix the nearest valve. Now she has a scar which she is proud of. They are almost 7 years old now, and unless they are facing away from me, I can tell them apart. Story 85. Perhaps there is wisdom in creating baby footprints. Like fingerprints, they are all unique. Story 86. A friend of mine had twin boys. He said the only time he ever had trouble telling them apart was when they caused trouble and ran away from him. Story 87. I haven't, but mine are fraternal and looked very different at birth. One had a head full of dark brown hair, while the other was basically bald until 2. Even if they had been identical, they had super distinctive cries from day 1. I could hear the difference over the monitor the day we got home. I did buy gold ID bracelets just in case. I have them stored to turn into adult-sized bracelets when they're older. 3 years later, they look alike enough to fool a lot of people, which they do for fun. Never me, though. Story 88. I have identical twin boys. Twin A was born with unusual skin tags on the sides of his thumbnails, which allowed us to easily tell them apart. I took him to the doctor to have them checked, and everything was fine. We were told they would likely just fall off on their own. By about 6 months, they were gone. Twin B had a weak eye, and before he got glasses, you could look at their eyes and differentiate them. When they were about 2 or 3 years old, Twin A got sick, and his voice took on a slight rasp. Now that they are 10, their voices are still the easiest way to tell them apart. Occasionally, my wife or I mix them up momentarily if we're not paying attention. They have also tried to convince us that they are their brother, but we catch on almost immediately. I am confident that Twin A and Twin B are named the same as they were on the day they were born. Story 89. My mom was born in the 1950s, and she and her twin were both referred to as the twins until they were about 5 and started school. I have no idea if they ended up with the names they were assigned or not. Story 90. I have identical twins. My sons had a 12-ounce difference at birth, and we could always tell who was who. I had gotten nail polish for their toes to keep track, but we didn't end up needing it. I even convinced myself they were fraternal until I had them DNA tested at around 8 months old. Story 91. All the time as infants, we were identical twins, but luckily one had a birthmark on his back, so we could always figure it out. Story 92. I have friends who are twins, and they know for certain that they were switched at birth and have each other's names. I'm not sure how they came to know this. Story 93. I am an identical twin girl, and I remember my mom looking for my sister's birthmark on her head, hidden in her hair. Story 94. Considering one is a boy and one is a girl, I think I'm good. I do have trouble telling them apart on the phone, from behind, or in the dark, though. Story 95. Great American life story on this. Story 96. Twin here. My sister and I have preauricular pits. One of us has only one, and the other has one on each ear. That's how our parents told us apart when we were newborns. Story 97. I am a parent of identical twin girls. I have mixed them up before, but for some reason, when I look at their faces, I can usually tell which one is which. In addition, their laughs, cries, and personalities are different. If I ever mix them up, I can usually tell based on those traits. Another distinguishing factor is the way they say certain words. For example, if someone drops something, one of my daughters always says, oh, while the other one says, oh no. They are 2 years old, for the record. Story 98. I dated twins once but would never mix them up. Melissa had a cute little mole on her thigh, and Mark had a distinctive feature. Oh, do you mean identical twins? That could be confusing. Story 99. Mom was a godparent to twins. Nobody could tell them apart. They didn't switch names, though, after their high school prank for graduation. Story 100. I babysat for a family that had triplets, consisting of twin boys and a girl. They painted one of the boys' toes green with polish and called him Green-Toed Graham. Story 101. Many years after high school, I started dating a girl I had liked during that time. The only problem was she had a twin, and I can't say with any certainty that I was with the same girl. Story 102. I'm a twin, and I would say my parents had it easy. My sister has a birthmark on her stomach that my parents called her Strawberry because it literally looked like a bright red strawberry. It's really faded now, you pretty much can't see it. Now that we're older, we honestly have 2 different vibes, but we are still the same in many ways. Story 103. I had a friend who had twin boys, identical, and they named them nearly identical names. differentiated only by one starting with R and the other with B. They only had to take them back to the hospital once for footprints to figure out which was which. R was always dressed in red, and B was always dressed in blue. When the couple went on their first baby break for dinner and a movie, leaving the babies with a babysitter, they returned home to a cheerful girl who said they had a great time. Both babies had eaten well, she had bathed them, and they had gone right to sleep. Mom went to check on them, and one baby had a red top and blue bottoms, while the other had a blue top and red bottoms. They were back at the hospital that night to have them footprint again. Mom just could not bear the thought of not knowing which was which for an instant. Story 104. I have dated 2 different sets of twins in my lifetime. The first pair was easy to tell apart. One twin was female, while the other was male, who was more fun to play video games with. In the second set of twins, both were female and not very good at video games. I struggled initially, but I eventually figured out that my ex enjoyed receiving oral pleasure, while her sister did not. True story, mostly. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.